And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather is showing this weakening front slowly moving eastward here into Bristol Bay, spreading some precipitation Kodiak Island, back up along the immediate southwest coast, Nunivak Island area. Lots of rain and snow showers here over the eastern southeast Bering Sea. Snow showers back over the western Bering to the central Aleutians. And stays wet, but less winds, and the rain not as heavy for the southeast coast. And for tomorrow, that low weakens and pulls northward there, and lighter amounts of rain in store for the entire panhandle, with the warmer air pulling up into even northern Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay areas. Light snow here up over the eastern, northeast interior areas. Scattered snow showers here over the Copper River Basin, mainly the eastern areas there. Otherwise dry southern Alaska on up the west coast to the North Slope and Arctic coast. And then for Sunday, warmer temperatures, a little bit more, or a lot more clouds, and increasing chances of light snow here across southern Alaska, especially the North Gulf Coast, drying out over the panhandle. And low pressure out over the western Bering Sea pushes a not so strong front into the central Aleutians with some periods of snow. Leftover precipitation with the former front here, keeping chance of snow along the Yukon Delta and Nunivak Island area up to St. Lawrence Island. Coastal water forecast for the southern coast, south or west to southwest winds, 20 knots, west winds 25 knots on the central coast, and the north coast looking at west to northwest winds at 20 knots. Lynn Canal tomorrow north at 15, southeast 15 for Stevens Passage and Clarence Strait. And then for Sunday, light north winds for Lynn Canal and Stevens Passage, southeast at 10 for Clarence Strait. East-southeast breeze at 10 knots for the south coast, central coast southeast at 20, and small craft advisories for the north coast for east winds at 25 to 30 knots. And for Cook Inlet tomorrow, northern Cook Inlet, light variable winds, and northeast at 20 here for southern Cook Inlet across Kamishak Bay, northwest 15 knots for the Barren Islands, western North Gulf Coast. Prince William Sound, north winds at 10 knots. Eastern North Gulf Coast, west and northwest winds, 15 knots. Sunday, Prince William Sound, east winds at 25 knots and east-southeast winds at 30 knots for the eastern North Gulf Coast, much lighter here on the west side. Northeast at 15 knots and southeast 15 for the Barren Islands. But small craft advisories here, southern Cook Inlet and Kamishak Bay, northeast winds picking up a little to 25 knots with seas up to 6 to 7 feet. And for Kodiak Island, Saturday, southeast to northeast winds, 15 to 20 knots. Alaska Peninsula, south to southwest winds, 15 to 20 knots, and east to 20 for Bristol Bay. And for Bristol Bay on Sunday, gale warning, southeast winds, 35 knots. Alaska Peninsula, south to southwest winds, south to southeast winds at 20 to 30 knots. Kodiak Island, east-southeast winds, 25 knots. Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, southwest winds 20 to 25 knots, Adak and Atka, small craft advisories, southwest at 30 knots. Gale warnings for the western Aleutians, west to southwest winds 40 to 45 knots. And for Sunday, still gale warnings for the western Aleutians, west-southwest winds 30 to 40 knots, and west-southwest at about 20 for Adak and Atka. Eastern Aleutians, west to southwest winds at 20 to 25 knots. And for the southwest coast and St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound, all looking at brisk wind advisories for Saturday for east winds at 25 knots. Got gale warnings for the St. Matthew Island area, east winds at 35 knots, down from the storms of today, and south winds at 20 knots with 10-foot seas for the Pribilofs. Outlook for Sunday, St. Paul and St. George, east winds 15 knots, northeast at 25 for St. Matthew Island. Gale warnings here for the Kuskokwim Delta coastline, and east winds 35 knots, east winds at 20 knots for the Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island, east winds at 15, but brisk wind advisories in Norton Sound for 25 knot winds out of the east. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, northeast to northwest winds at 15 knots, central coast, northeast at 15. Brisk wind advisories for the western Arctic coast, northeast at 25, and the Chukchi Sea, northeast winds 25 to 35 knots. And about the same on Sunday, Chukchi Sea, northeast winds 25 to 35 knots with the western Arctic coast, northeast up to 30 knots now for brisk wind advisories there. and northeast at 20 knots for the central coast, and north to northeast winds 15 knots for the eastern Beaufort Sea.